Welcome back to Lena's Romantasy collection, where the alphas are possessive and the deltas never back down. Quick question for the pack before we dive into today's disaster. Where are you listening from right now? Let me know in the comments and drop a bulldog emoji if your pet is currently judging your chaotic life choices, just like our friend Meatball here. Today we have a special one. It's sarcastic, it's high voltage, and it involves a very grumpy king and a very ripped shirt. But before we start, if you want to support the channel and get early access to stories like this, hit that join button down below. It helps us keep the lights on and the alphas in line. Now, take a deep breath. The mechanic is in, the radiator is blown, and the Alpha King just lost his temper. Let's read. Chapter 1. The rusted cast iron radiator in the corner of Chloe Kingsley's room did not just leak. It surrendered completely. A sharp metallic squeal pierced the quiet of the Delta barracks, followed instantly by a geyser of freezing, murky water. Chloe bolted upright in bed. The icy spray hit her face, jolting her awake. She scrambled off her mattress, her bare feet hitting an expanding puddle on the linoleum floor. Great, just fantastic. I finally get 4 hours of sleep and the universe decides I need a midnight swim. She grabbed the multi-tool clipped to the belt of her discarded work trousers, splashing across the small room. She clamped the pliers onto the radiator's shut-off valve, gritting her teeth as she twisted. The ancient metal resisted, then snapped clean off in her hand. The water pressure intensified, soaking her thin tank top and sleep shorts in seconds. "No, no, no," she muttered, dropping the broken valve. "You stupid, stubborn piece of scrap metal." From his elevated cot in the corner, Meatball lifted his heavy head. The English bulldog blinked slowly, utterly unfazed by the rising tide threatening his favorite chew toys. He let out a rumbling snort and went back to sleep. Chloe waded to her tiny closet. She yanked the door open, only to find the overhead pipe had burst there too. Her meager collection of mechanics' uniforms, t-shirts, and jeans were thoroughly drenched, plastered together in a soggy, ruined mess. She shivered, wrapping her arms around her chest. The packhouse heating in the lower levels was notoriously unreliable, and the sudden dampness was biting into her pale skin. She could not stay in wet clothes. Pneumonia was not on her schedule for tomorrow's maintenance rounds. She needed something dry, immediately. The Royal Laundry Wing is 2 floors up. The king has hundreds of shirts. He won't miss one. He probably doesn't even know what he owns. It was a terrible idea, fueled by desperation and freezing temperatures. But Delta's stubbornness often overrode common sense. "Stay here, Meat," Chloe whispered to the snoring dog. Naturally, Meatball ignored the command. The moment she slipped out the door, she heard the distinct rhythmic click-clacking of his claws on the linoleum behind her. He waddled after her, his tan and white body swaying like a furry pendulum. Chloe sighed, but did not stop. She crept up the service stairwell, avoiding the creaky 3rd step. The transition from the damp, drafty Delta quarters to the Alpha Wing was drastic. The air here was warm, thick with the scent of expensive floor polish and silent luxury. The Royal Laundry Room was massive, lined with gleaming white machines. A massive wicker basket sat near the central island, overflowing with dry, clean garments awaiting pressing. Chloe darted toward it, rummaging quickly. Her fingers closed over fine, heavy cotton. She pulled out a pristine, white button-down shirt. It was enormous, clearly tailored for a man with a massive frame. She stripped off her soaked tank top and shorts, leaving them in a wet pile by the door, and slipped the crisp fabric over her shoulders. The shirt fell past her mid-thigh, acting perfectly as a makeshift dress. She fastened the buttons with shivering fingers. The moment the collar settled around her neck, a powerful fragrance hit her senses. It was an intense rush of charred cedar and rain-drenched earth. Her inner wolf stirred, a sudden, restless flutter in her chest. The scent was undeniably alpha. It was dominant, demanding, and incredibly warm. "I just need to get back to my room. Sleep in this, wash it tomorrow, sneak it back." A flawless, idiot-proof plan. She rolled the sleeves up past her elbows, chewed nervously on her bottom lip, and peeked out into the silent, carpeted corridor. The coast was clear. With Meatball huffing quietly at her heels, Chloe started the journey back to her flooded room, completely unaware of the disaster waiting around the corner. Chapter 2. The Alpha Wing corridors were a maze of plush carpets and dim, elegant lighting. Chloe hugged her arms across her chest, the oversized white shirt swallowing her frame. The hem brushed her mid-thigh, giving her just enough modesty to avoid total humiliation if a night guard spotted her. She quickened her pace, her bare feet making no sound. Meatball, however, was not built for stealth. The bulldog dragged his paws, emitting a rhythmic, wheezing snort with every step. "Meatball, pick up your feet," she hissed over her shoulder. "Be a silent predator." I am literally being hunted by my own dog, who breathes like a broken engine. If we get caught, I'm blaming him. She turned the final corner toward the service stairs, her eyes on the dog, and slammed face first into a solid, unmoving wall. A sharp gasp escaped her lips as she stumbled backward. Powerful hands caught her upper arms instantly, preventing her from hitting the floor. The grip was firm, burning hot even through the thick cotton of the shirt. Chloe looked up, her apologies freezing in her throat. Standing above her was Raymond Stormbringer, the Alpha King. He was towering, his broad shoulders blocking the hallway light. His hair, the color of a midnight storm, was slightly rumpled, suggesting he had been running a hand through it in frustration. His piercing gaze locked onto hers, cold and startlingly intense. He wore dark trousers and a loosened tie, looking every inch the ruthless ruler the pack feared. Ray froze, his nostrils flaring. The fragrance of his own musk, charred cedar and rain-drenched earth, was blooming right in front of him, but it was mixed with something else, something bright, stubborn, and distinctly Delta. Why is this mechanic wearing my clothes? And why does my wolf suddenly want to drag her into my den and lock the door? He stared down at the copper-haired woman. She had a smudge of oil on her left cheek, and her wide, expressive eyes were locked onto his face in sheer panic. He recognized her from the technical division, Kingsley. "What?" Ray began, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that made the floorboards tremble. "Are you wearing?" Chloe chewed her bottom lip violently. Her mind raced, searching for a plausible, non-treasonous explanation. "A shirt, Your Majesty. It is. A very nice shirt." Ray released her arms, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. Chloe took a step back, her spine hitting the wall behind her. The king loomed over her, his presence suffocating. His heavy signet ring caught the dim light as he reached out, trailing a single finger down the crisp lapel of the garment. "It is my shirt, Kingsley," Ray said, his tone dropping an octave. For an alpha, scent was territory. It was ownership. Seeing a lower-ranking female wrapped in his scent was a direct challenge to his authority, or an act of extreme submission. His primal instincts flared violently, warring with his rational mind. "She smells incredible mixed with my scent. I need to establish order before I lose my mind." "There was a flood," Chloe blurted out, her Delta stubbornness fighting through the heavy blanket of his alpha command. "My radiator exploded. Everything is soaked. I just needed something dry. It was an emergency." Before Ray could respond, a loud, wet snort broke the tension. Meatball waddled between them, totally oblivious to the deadly power dynamic. The bulldog sniffed Ray's polished leather shoe, decided it was acceptable, and promptly sat heavily on the king's foot. Ray glanced down at the wrinkly animal, then back up at Chloe, a muscle ticking in his pale jaw. The scent of her fear and defiance was intoxicating. He needed to assert control, immediately, before the madness fully took over his senses. Chapter 3. The silence in the hallway stretched, thick and suffocating. The only sound was Meatball's rhythmic wheezing as he comfortably anchored himself to the Alpha King's left foot. 2 night guards, armed and stoic, rounded the far corner. They stopped dead in their tracks at the sight of their ruler cornering a barefoot Delta female wearing nothing but his royal laundry. Ray ignored the guards. His entire focus was locked onto Chloe. The sight of the stark white fabric against her pale skin, carrying his distinct, dominant scent, pushed his control to the absolute brink. His chest rose and fell with heavy, measured breaths. He reached down and adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, a familiar habit to ground his temper. "You broke into my wing," Ray stated, his voice dangerously even. "You stole my property, and now you are parading my scent through the halls like a claiming challenge." Chloe's eyes widened. "A challenge? No, sir. I'm a mechanic, not an assassin. I was cold. My closet is currently an indoor swimming pool." Why won't he just let me go? He has closets full of clothes. He is looking at me like I am his next meal. Take it off, Ray commanded. The words were not a request. They carried the full, crushing weight of an alpha's direct order. Chloe's body instinctively wanted to obey. Her knees trembled, but her Delta pride flared up fiercely. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, gripping the fabric. I cannot take it off, she argued, her voice slightly frantic. I have nothing else on underneath, unless you want me walking back to the barracks completely bare, which I am fairly certain violates several pack decency laws. Ray stepped closer, completely invading her personal space. The heat radiating from his massive frame was scorching. He looked down at Meatball, who was now quietly gnawing on the king's shoelace. Ray gently but firmly nudged the bulldog aside with his other foot. I gave you an order, Kingsley, Ray growled, leaning down until his lips were inches from her ear. She dares to defy me? Right here, my wolf is going to tear this place apart if I don't establish dominance this exact second. I am not stripping in the hallway, Ray, Chloe snapped back, the informal use of his name slipping out in her panic. The guards at the end of the hall visibly flinched. Ray's eyes darkened completely, the pupils blowing wide. The defiance was the final spark. He reached out, his large hands grabbing the collar of the shirt on either side of her neck. Chloe gasped, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She expected him to shake her, or perhaps drag her toward the stairs. Instead, Ray gripped the fabric tightly and yanked his hands apart. The thick cotton gave way with a loud, violent tearing sound. Buttons popped off, pinging sharply against the marble floor. He ripped the shirt cleanly down the middle, exposing her bare, trembling skin exactly as she had warned him. The sudden rush of cold hallway air hit her damp skin, making her shiver violently. Chloe stood frozen, staring at the ruined halves of the shirt dangling from her shoulders. Her jaw dropped in sheer disbelief. There, Ray said, his voice a ragged whisper. Now it is trash. You do not wear my scent without my permission. I ruined it, but seeing her trembling, staring up at me, it was completely worth the destruction. Meatball looked up at the sound of the tearing fabric, sniffed a stray button on the floor, and lazily licked his chops, entirely unimpressed by the display of primal dominance. Chapter 4. Chloe stared down at the shredded ruins of the king's garment. The crisp cotton hung uselessly from her shoulders, exposing her bare skin to the freezing hallway drafts. The damp cold immediately bit into her, and a violent shiver wrecked her frame. She frantically gathered the torn halves of the fabric over her chest and looked back up at Ray, her expression caught somewhere between shock and pure outrage. You destroyed it, she breathed, her sarcasm slipping through the fear. Brilliant problem-solving skills, Your Majesty, really top-tier leadership. He just ripped my only dry clothing. I am going to freeze to death, and my last words will be an insult to the king. Ray stared at her shivering form. The sharp, biting cold of the hallway was affecting her rapidly. The possessive fury that had consumed him seconds ago morphed instantly into an urgent need to protect. He turned his head sharply toward the two stunned guards at the end of the hall. Bring me your patrol cloak, now, Ray barked. One guard scrambled forward, unhooking the heavy, dark wool cloak from his shoulders and holding it out. Ray snatched it from the man's hands and whipped it around Chloe's shoulders. The heavy fabric engulfed her, instantly blocking the draft. He pulled the edges tightly together under her chin, his knuckles brushing briefly against her cold collarbone. My office, Ray commanded, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. Walk. He did not wait for her to comply. He turned on his heel and strode down the corridor, his long legs eating up the distance. Chloe gathered the oversized cloak securely around herself. She glared at his retreating back, her bare feet protesting against the cold marble floor. Come on, Meat, she muttered. Meatball grunted, slowly hauling himself up from the floor, and began his lethargic waddle, completely indifferent to the royal escort. The king's office was massive, dominated by dark oak furniture and towering bookshelves. Ray stood behind his vast desk, his hands planted firmly on the polished wood. The moment Chloe stepped inside, he hit a button on his console. The heavy double doors clicked shut behind her, locking automatically. Chloe stood awkwardly in the center of the expansive room. The wool cloak was warm, but her bare legs and wet feet were freezing. Meatball immediately found a plush, intricately woven rug near the desk, circled twice, and collapsed onto it with a loud sigh. Explain, Ray demanded, his piercing gaze tracking her every movement. I need her to give me a reason not to throw her in the holding cells, because right now, all I want to do is lock this door and keep her here. Chloe chewed her lip, clutching the cloak tighter. I told you, the cast iron radiator in my room broke. The shutoff valve snapped when I tried to fix it with my multi-tool. The room flooded. My closet flooded. I was freezing, so I went to find dry laundry. Ray straightened up, frowning. You are a Delta. Why are you in a room with failing plumbing and inadequate heating? Maintenance reports claim the barracks are fully updated. Chloe let out a dry, humorless laugh. Reports lie, Ray. We fix everything up here in the Royal Wing, but the lower levels get the spare parts. I have been reporting that radiator for 3 months. Ray's jaw tightened. The thought of her shivering in a flooded, freezing room stirred a dangerous, protective rage inside him. The pack was his responsibility, and this female had been neglected under his roof. He looked down at the bulldog snoring loudly on his favorite rug, then back to the defiant woman standing before him. The situation required discipline, but his instincts demanded something entirely different. Chapter 5. The silence in the royal office was thick, broken only by the rhythmic, grating snores of the bulldog collapsed on the intricate floor covering. Ray Stormbringer did not break eye contact with Chloe as he reached for the mahogany console on his desk. He pressed a sleek silver button. Maintenance Dispatch, Section 4, Ray commanded, his voice a low, authoritative rumble. We have a ruptured main line in the lower Delta barracks. Send a crew to sever the water supply and extract a sheared radiator valve immediately. I want the flooding contained within the hour. A brisk voice crackled through the speaker, confirming the urgent directive. Ray released the button, effectively neutralizing the disaster Chloe had fled from. Chloe stood frozen, clutching the heavy wool patrol cloak tightly around her bare shoulders. The sudden realization that her chaotic, waterlogged crisis was handled with a single sentence left her momentarily speechless. She shifted her bare feet on the polished floor, the remnants of the cold hallway still clinging to her skin. He fixes a catastrophic plumbing failure with the push of a button, while I was fighting a rusted pipe with pliers like an absolute amateur, Chloe thought, suppressing a shiver. The disparity in our resources is staggering. Ray leaned back against the edge of his desk, crossing his arms over his broad chest. His dark trousers and loosened tie presented a deceptively relaxed posture, but his piercing gaze remained hyper-focused. He was meticulously calculating his next maneuver. A Delta had boldly paraded his defining scent through the corridors. Protocol demanded a severe reprimand to ascertain boundaries, yet his primal instincts vehemently rejected the notion of casting her out. Your living quarters are compromised, Ray stated, his tone devoid of inflection. Consequently, you will be relocated to a secure suite within the Alpha Wing until the water damage is fully remediated. Chloe's jaw dropped slightly. Sir, I appreciate the gesture, but my crew can clear out a cot in the motor pool. I do not need a royal suite. Keeping her within my sight is the only pragmatic way to ensure she isn't shivering in a damp basement again, Ray thought, a muscle ticking in his pale jaw. Her stubbornness is infuriating, yet remarkably captivating. That was not a suggestion, Kingsley, Ray replied, pushing off the desk and taking a deliberate step toward her. The potent fragrance of charred cedar and rain-drenched earth rolled off him, enveloping her senses. Furthermore, you destroyed my property. You paraded a claiming challenge before my night guards. A debt is owed. Chloe tightened her grip on the cloak, her heart thudding with a relentless driving cadence against her ribs. I did not issue a challenge. It was an act of serendipitous desperation. Regardless of intent, the pack witnessed the infraction. Ray countered smoothly. To rectify this breach of hierarchy, you will serve as my personal executive assistant, effective immediately. You will shadow my schedule, manage my correspondence, and remain in my proximity until I deem the debt settled. An assistant? Chloe gasped, her expressive eyes widening in pure horror. I am a senior mechanic. I rebuild transmission blocks. I do not fetch coffee or coordinate tedious diplomatic calendars. If he thinks I am going to organize his schedule, he is severely underestimating my capacity for bureaucratic sabotage. Chloe plodded silently, glaring at the towering Alpha. You will adapt. Ray commanded softly, his proximity causing a sudden, breathless impact to her midsection. You report here at sunrise. Do not be late. Meatball let out a loud, whistling snort, shifting his bulky weight on the rug, entirely oblivious to the monumental shift in his owner's destiny. Chapter 6. The morning sun filtered through the towering arched windows of the royal office, illuminating the floating dust motes. Chloe stood near the massive mahogany desk, dressed in a dry, spare maintenance uniform she had retrieved from a locker room. She shifted her weight, feeling profoundly out of place in the opulent environment. At her feet, Meatball was conducting a thorough investigation of the king's workspace. The bulldog waddled systematically around the perimeter, his nose pressed firmly to the floorboards. Ray sat behind his desk, reviewing a stack of territorial reports. He had barely spoken 3 words to her since she arrived, yet his dominant presence permeated every square inch of the room. Chloe chewed on her bottom lip, scanning the intricate woodwork and pristine furnishings. The arrogance of this man is astounding, but the heat radiating from him is entirely distracting, Chloe admitted internally, forcing her gaze away from his broad, formidable shoulders. Before she could inquire about her inaugural tasks, a timid knock echoed through the heavy double doors. A junior maintenance technician entered, carrying a transparent plastic storage crate. Kingsley salvaged items from the flood, Your Majesty, the technician announced, setting the bin carefully on a side table. Dried and sanitized as requested. Chloe darted toward the crate. Resting securely on top of her folded dry clothing was the familiar heavy steel of her multi-tool. She had left it near the snapped valve in her flooded room. She snatched it up with an immense sigh of relief, immediately securing it to her utility belt. Having my tool back makes me feel significantly less vulnerable in a room saturated with his dominant aura, Chloe thought, the cold metal grounding her racing thoughts. Ray glanced up from his documents, observing the swift, practiced motion. Seeing her touch that tool with such reverence reveals far more about her pragmatic survival instincts than she realizes. He mused silently. A sudden, ominous trickling sound shattered the quiet focus of the room. Chloe froze, her head snapping downward. Meatball had positioned himself squarely in the center of the office. He was currently relieving himself upon a magnificent, intricately woven rug that boasted unparalleled, luxurious craftsmanship. "Meatball, no!" Chloe shrieked, lunging forward to scoop up the hefty dog midstream. Ray dropped his pen, his piercing gaze locked onto the expanding dark stain ruining the exquisite fabric. A terrifying, absolute silence descended upon the office. He slowly pushed his chair back and stood up to his full, towering height. "Kingsley," Ray began, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly timbre. "It is an anxiety reflex," Chloe babbled frantically, holding the dripping bulldog awkwardly away from her uniform. The sudden change in environment, the sheer volume of alpha pheromones in here, it confused his bladder. "I will scrub it myself, I swear." Of all the places to relieve himself, Meatball chose the one artifact that likely possesses a magnificent historical lineage. Chloe panicked, her mind racing for a viable cleaning solution. Ray walked slowly around the desk, staring down at the unapologetic animal. Meatball blinked his wide, drooping eyes at the Alpha King and let out a defiant, wheezing grunt. "I have decimated rogue warlords and conquered territories, yet I am currently being terrorized by a snoring, incontinent footstool," Ray contemplated, pinching the bridge of his pale nose. "Dispose of the rug," Ray ordered quietly, gesturing to the ruined textile, "and find somewhere to sequester that menace. Because tonight, you have a far more complex assignment than managing canine bodily fluids." Chapter 7. The tension in the royal suite was palpable as Ray briefed Chloe on the evening's diplomatic summit. He stood by the massive stone fireplace, the unlit hearth providing a stark backdrop to his imposing figure. The afternoon light cast long, dramatic shadows across his pale skin and midnight-colored hair. "We are hosting Alpha Leander of the Silverfall Pack," Ray instructed, his tone remarkably rigid. "He controls the northern trade routes. He is notoriously territorial, incredibly cunning, and prone to assessing weaknesses through aggressive posturing." Chloe sat on the edge of a velvet armchair, her multi-tool resting securely on her belt. "And my role in this high-stakes political theater?" "You will stand by my side," Ray commanded, turning to face her fully. "You will observe Leander's security detail, With your technical expertise, ascertain if they are carrying concealed armaments or specialized communication devices. You understand mechanics better than my guards do. Chloe raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms over her chest. So, I am transitioning from fixing radiators to conducting surreptitious espionage? That is quite a formidable leap in my job description. I am a mechanic, not an elite intelligence operative. This entire assignment is a catastrophic failure waiting to materialize, Chloe thought, her anxiety spiking sharply. Ray closed the distance between them with 2 long strides. He stopped mere inches from her chair, forcing her to look up into his intense, stormy eyes. Leander is ruthless. He will undoubtedly notice you. If he addresses you, you reply with utmost brevity. You do not engage, and you do not leave my immediate proximity under any circumstances. If Leander looks at her for longer than a fleeting requisite second, diplomacy will conclude abruptly in violence, Ray acknowledged silently, a protective growl rumbling low in his chest. I am placing her in a perilous environment, but leaving her behind feels altogether impossible. Understood, Chloe agreed softly, her throat suddenly dry. The intoxicating fragrance of bergamot and sun-warmed amber, her own natural scent, flared slightly under the pressure of his alpha aura. Before the profound tension could escalate further, a sharp knock resonated from the corridor. A royal attendant entered promptly, carrying a large, opaque garment bag draped over his arm. The attire you requested for your assistant, Your Majesty, the attendant stated, bowing respectfully before hanging the bag on a nearby valet stand and swiftly exiting the room. Ray turned his attention to the concealed garment. The dinner commences at 8 o'clock. You will wear that, and you will meet me in the grand foyer. Do not bring the dog. Chloe stood up, eyeing the bag with deep suspicion. What exactly is in there? Because if it involves lace or restrictive corsetry, my surveillance capabilities will be severely diminished. It is appropriate diplomatic attire, Ray deflected smoothly, though a subtle glint of anticipation flashed in his eyes. He moved toward the door. Prepare yourself, Kingsley. Tonight requires meticulous execution. As the heavy door clicked shut behind him, Chloe released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He is hovering over me like a massive, brooding storm cloud, and it is scrambling my cognitive functions entirely. She walked over to the valet stand and slowly unzipped the protective bag, fully prepared to battle whatever extravagant, overly complicated fabric the king had deemed necessary for Adelta's first undercover operation. Chapter 8. Chloe stared at her reflection in the full-length gilded mirror of her temporary guest suite, completely dumbfounded. The garment Ray had provided was not merely a dress, it was a masterful display of magnificent opulence. The gown was fashioned from heavy, cascading silk in a rich, vibrant plum hue. It featured a daringly elegant neckline and a sweeping skirt that flowed to the floor with dramatic volume. It fit her athletic frame with flawless precision, transforming the grease-stained mechanic into a striking, formidable figure. However, it presented a monumental, pragmatic issue. Where am I supposed to put my gear? Chloe muttered to the empty room. If I have to puncture a rival alpha tonight to prevent an assassination, at least I will be accessorized with spectacular elegance, she mused, pacing the plush carpet. Leaving her multi-tool behind was categorically unacceptable. It was her lifeline, her primary defense mechanism, and the only familiar object she possessed in this chaotic new reality. She marched over to her plastic storage crate and rummaged through the salvaged tools. Her fingers brushed against the thick, heavy-duty elastic band she typically used to secure loose wiring harnesses. An idea sparked. Chloe lifted the voluminous layers of the plum skirt. She wrapped the thick elastic band securely around her upper right thigh, creating a makeshift sturdy garter. She then slid the cold, reassuring steel of the multi-tool beneath the band, ensuring it sat flat against her skin. The layers of silk fell perfectly back into place, completely concealing the weapon. Satisfied with her surreptitious modification, she slipped into a pair of sleek, dark heels she found at the bottom of the garment bag and exited the suite. Ray was waiting in the grand foyer. He wore a sharply tailored, dark formal suit that accentuated the sheer breadth of his shoulders. When the rhythmic sound of her heels echoed on the marble staircase, he turned. The Alpha King froze entirely. His piercing gaze swept over the rich plum fabric, tracking the way it hugged her waist and complemented her vibrant copper hair. The air in the foyer immediately thickened with the sudden, heavy rush of his charred cedar scent. She looks devastating. I have made a massive critical tactical error bringing her into a room populated by other territorial males, Ray thought, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. The urge to cancel this summit and lock the doors is becoming remarkably difficult to suppress. Chloe reached the bottom of the stairs, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs under the sheer weight of his scrutiny. Is something wrong with the dress? Because I can still change back into my uniform. His gaze is burning through the fabric of this gown, making my pulse race with an erratic, relentless cadence. Chloe panics silently, shifting her weight nervously. The garment is acceptable, Ray stated flatly, his voice significantly rougher than usual. He stepped forward, offering his arm with rigid formality. Remember the parameters, Kingsley. You remain silent, you observe, and you do not leave my side. Chloe placed her hand tentatively upon his solid forearm, the heat of his skin radiating through his suit jacket. As they walked toward the grand dining hall to face the rival pack, the hidden multi-tool pressed reassuringly against her thigh. A secret, stubborn piece of the Delta mechanic walking into a den of alphas. Chapter 9. The grand dining hall was a masterclass in lavish authority. Towering crystal chandeliers cast fragmented, prismatic light across a long, polished mahogany table adorned with premium silver settings. Chloe stepped over the threshold, her sleek dark heels sinking slightly into the plush, crimson carpets. The heavy plum silk gown cascaded gracefully around her athletic frame, though her mind was entirely focused on the concealed steel multi-tool pressing reassuringly against her right thigh. At the far end of the vast room stood Alpha Leander. He was a broad, deeply scarred man with sandy blonde hair and a predatory, unblinking stare. Behind him stood 4 imposing guards wearing rigid charcoal gray tactical jackets. If I had to guess, those jackets are hiding reinforced kinetic body armor and at least 2 subterranean communication transmitters per man. They are not here for casual diplomacy. Chloe deduced rapidly, keeping her expression perfectly neutral. Ray's grip on her elbow was firm, the heat of his palm radiating through the dark fabric of his formal suit jacket. The potent, demanding fragrance of charred cedar and rain-drenched earth rolled off his massive frame in aggressive waves, serving as an invisible shield around her. "Stormbringer," Leander greeted, his voice a gravelly, grating rasp that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. He did not offer his hand. Instead, his pale eyes immediately slid past the Alpha King, locking onto Chloe with unabashed, intrusive curiosity. He is deliberately scrutinizing her to provoke me. If he takes one step closer to my Delta, this summit ends in immediate bloodshed. Ray calculated, a low, barely audible vibration of a growl vibrating in his chest. Leander took a slow, deliberate step forward, entirely ignoring Ray's silent warning. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring as he analyzed the complex olfactory dynamic in the room. A slow, deeply unsettling smirk stretched across his scarred face. "Fascinating," Leander murmured, his gaze sweeping over the vibrant plum silk. "A Delta wolf, yet she is entirely saturated in your personal scent, Ray. And she possesses an underlying fragrance of bergamot and sun-warmed amber that is quite delectable. Are you utilizing your maintenance tier for alternative domestic entertainment now?" A sudden icy stricture seized Chloe's lungs. The insult was incredibly brazen, designed specifically to humiliate her and undermine Ray's leadership simultaneously. She tightened her jaw, fiercely resisting the urge to reach under her skirt for her weapon. "She is my personal executive assistant, Leander," Ray stated. His voice was devastatingly calm, but the air pressure in the room shifted violently, dropping to a suffocating level. "Please do not shift into a massive wolf and decimate this man right here. The cleanup would take my department weeks." Chloe panicked internally, feeling the sheer, terrifying magnitude of Ray's mounting fury. Leander chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He reached out with audacious speed, attempting to grasp Chloe's hand. "A waste of vibrant talent. My pack rewards competence far more generously. Perhaps you would prefer a transfer to a realm where she is properly valued, rather than paraded as a borrowed plaything." Before Leander's fingers could even brush the skin of her knuckles, Ray moved. It was a blur of devastating primal speed. He seized Leander's wrist, his long fingers locking around the rival Alpha's forearm like a steel vice. The sound of Leander's bones creaking under the immense pressure echoed sharply through the silent hall. Ray's eyes had shifted completely, the human pupils swallowed entirely by the terrifying luminescent gold of his inner wolf. "Touch her," Ray whispered, his voice a demonic, overlapping harmony of man and beast. "And you will leave my territory in distinct, separate pieces." The 4 Silverfall guards instantly reached inside their charcoal jackets, but Ray did not even flinch. He shoved Leander backward with a violent thrust, breaking the physical contact but maintaining absolute, terrifying dominance over the space. The diplomatic dinner had ended before the first course could even be served. Chapter 10. The abrupt departure from the dining hall was a chaotic blur of hostile posturing and barely contained feral aggression. Ray did not look back at the furious Silverfall delegation. He simply clamped his hand firmly over Chloe's shoulder, guiding her rapidly through the labyrinthine corridors of the royal wing. His strides were long and relentless, forcing Chloe to practically jog in her dark heels to maintain his punishing pace. They reached the private royal lift, an elegant enclosed space, paneled in dark wood and polished brass. Ray slammed his hand against the call button. The heavy doors parted instantly, and he ushered her inside, following close behind. The doors slid shut, sealing them in a suffocatingly intimate environment. The lift began its smooth descent, but the atmosphere inside the small car was volatile. Ray was pacing the confined square of the floor, his broad shoulders tense, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. The overwhelming aroma of his charred cedar scent filled every cubic inch of the air, thick and intoxicatingly dominant. He is actively fighting a physiological shift. The adrenaline from the confrontation is still surging through his veins, and I am trapped in a metal box with a highly agitated apex predator. Chloe realized, pressing her back firmly against the brass railing. "He deliberately intended to disrespect you," Chloe offered quietly, attempting to inject a measure of rational diplomacy into the highly charged space. "It was a calculated provocation, Ray. You handled it." Ray stopped pacing. He turned to face her, his chest heaving under his tailored formal suit. The luminescent gold had retreated from his eyes, but the stormy, intense darkness that replaced it was equally unnerving. He stepped closer, eliminating the negligible distance between them. The cascading layers of her plum silk gown rustled softly as she subconsciously leaned away from his overwhelming heat. "He looked at you as if you were disposable." Ray ground out, his voice a harsh, ragged whisper. He reached out, his knuckles lightly grazing the exposed skin of her collarbone. "As if you were merely an object to be bartered." A frantic, irregular cadence hammered violently against Chloe's ribs. The sheer intensity of his focus was paralyzing. "I am a Delta, Ray. To alphas like Leander, I am inherently disposable. It is the established hierarchy." Before Ray could issue a vehement denial, a catastrophic, grinding screech tore through the lift shaft. The entire car shuddered violently, throwing Chloe forward. She collided solidly against Ray's chest. He caught her instantly, wrapping his massive arm securely around her waist to stabilize her. The lift plummeted for a terrifying fraction of a second before the emergency brakes engaged with a deafening metallic shriek. The car jolted to a severe, permanent halt. The elegant overhead lights flickered, hummed erratically, and promptly died, plunging the confined space into absolute darkness. A solitary, dim emergency bulb flickered to life near the ceiling, casting ominous, shifting shadows across their faces. "We are stalled," Ray stated, his grip on her waist remaining fiercely tight. "Of course we are trapped, because the universe has an exceptionally twisted sense of humor, and my blood pressure was not already dangerously elevated," Chloe thought, acutely aware of the hard planes of his chest pressing against her. She gently extracted herself from his embrace, stepping back to analyze the brass control panel. "It is not a mechanical failure. The deceleration was too abrupt. Someone purposefully severed the primary relay feed from the exterior control grid." Ray's jaw tightened, his possessive instincts immediately transitioning into high-alert tactical defense. "Leander's guards. They sabotaged the infrastructure in retaliation." "Probably," Chloe agreed, chewing her bottom lip. She reached down, her fingers gathering the luxurious folds of the plum silk skirt. "Fortunately, Your Majesty, you locked a senior mechanic inside the box." Ray watched, momentarily mesmerized, as she hiked the expensive fabric up her thigh, exposing the heavy-duty elastic band, and smoothly withdrew the cold steel multi-tool. Chapter 11. The dim amber glow of the emergency light cast long shadows as Chloe expertly wedged the flathead edge of her multi-tool into the seam of the brass control panel. With a sharp practiced twist, she popped the cover plate off, exposing a tangled nest of dormant wires and sophisticated circuitry. Ray stood directly behind her, utilizing his towering frame to shield her back, though there was no immediate physical threat inside the stalled car. The proximity was deliberate. The air in the lift was growing steadily warmer, saturated entirely by the intertwining fragrances of her bergamot and his rain-drenched cedar. The primary feed is completely dead, Chloe diagnosed, stripping a small segment of wire with the customized blade of her tool. I need to bypass the security interlock and jump the circuit to the auxiliary power line. It will take a few minutes. She operates under pressure with flawless, magnificent precision. I am entirely captivated by a woman dismantling my infrastructure in an astronomical silk gown. Ray acknowledged silently, a distinct surge of pride swelling in his chest. To mitigate the suffocating, highly charged silence of the confined space, Ray leaned against the opposite wall. Kingsley, the night of the flood, why did you traverse two entirely separate security zones to acquire my specific garment? There were adequate textiles in the lower auxiliary laundries. Chloe froze. Her hands hovered over the exposed circuitry. She had anticipated reprimands, but not this piercing, psychological inquiry. She resumed her work, meticulously twisting two copper filaments together. The auxiliary laundries are unheated, Chloe answered, her voice deliberately flat. They harbor mildew, and the garments are coarse. That is a logistical fact, not the complete truth, Ray countered softly, his perceptive gaze missing absolutely nothing. Why my wing? Why my scent? Chloe exhaled a long, shaky breath. The adrenaline from the dining hall incident, combined with the claustrophobic tension of the lift, eroded her usual defensive sarcasm. She turned her head slightly, meeting his intense, shadowy gaze. Because I was exhausted, Ray, she confessed, her voice dropping to a vulnerable whisper. For 5 years, I have rebuilt the generators that keep your opulent suites warm. I have repaired the filtration systems that keep your drinking water pristine. Yet, I am relegated to a subterranean freezing room where the plumbing inevitably catastrophically fails. She turned back to the panel, her fingers deftly securing the bypassed relay. When the radiator burst, I was freezing, shivering, and profoundly angry. I bypassed the auxiliary laundries because, for one solitary night, I wanted to experience what it felt like to be warm. I wanted to touch the premium, flawless cotton that the king wears, just to momentarily pretend I possessed a fraction of that security. A profound, agonizing stricture seized Ray's chest. The confession was not an act of rebellion, it was a damning indictment of his systemic negligence. He had allowed the foundational tier of his pack to endure squalor while he reigned in oblivious luxury. I have failed her. I have failed the very people who sustain this territory. She sought my scent for comfort, and I tore it from her shoulders in an act of possessive arrogance, Ray realized, the sheer gravity of his historical ignorance hitting him with devastating force. He stepped forward, bridging the gap between them until his chest was a mere inch from her back. He did not touch her, but his commanding presence was an absolute anchor. You will never experience the cold again, Chloe, Ray vowed, his tone carrying an absolute unbreakable finality. Before she could process the profound weight of his promise, she held the insulated rubber grip of her multi-tool and used the steel pliers to tightly twist the final copper wires together, safely jumping the circuit. The lift shuddered violently, the overhead lights blazing back to brilliant life. The car surged upward, bypassing the lobby entirely and hurtling directly toward the Alpha residential sector. Chapter 12. The brass doors of the lift chimed softly and glided apart, revealing the expansive, meticulously guarded corridors of the Alpha residential tier. Chloe stepped out, her plum silk gown swishing elegantly against the polished marble, her multi-tool still gripped firmly in her hand. She turned right, heading instinctively toward the temporary guest suite where she had been previously sequestered. Incorrect direction, Kingsley, Ray instructed smoothly, his long strides easily catching up to her. He placed a guiding hand upon the small of her back, the heat of his palm seeping through the luxurious silk, and steered her firmly in the opposite direction. He is guiding me toward the restricted royal sanctum. My blood pressure is currently achieving unprecedented, terrifying levels, Chloe thought, her breath catching in her throat as they bypassed the standard residential quarters entirely. Ray stopped before a massive, intricately carved set of double doors constructed from dark mahogany. These were the primary chambers, located directly adjacent to the Alpha King's personal master suite. He pressed his palm against the biometric scanner embedded in the wall, the heavy locking mechanism disengaged with a solid, satisfying click. He pushed the doors open, revealing a breathtaking expanse of luxury. The suite featured vaulted ceilings, a steady, perfectly maintained gas fireplace, and panoramic windows overlooking the sprawling pack territory. However, it was not the astronomical opulence that made Chloe halt in her tracks. Sitting unceremoniously in the center of the plush hand-woven rug was her transparent plastic storage crate. It contained her salvaged sanitized uniforms, her spare boots, and her battered maintenance logs. And lounging majestically upon a ridiculously lavish velvet-tufted chaise lounge near the windows was Meatball. The bulldog lifted his heavy, wrinkly head at their entrance, let out a prolonged, whistling snort of approval, and immediately rested his chin back upon his paws, utterly comfortable in his new premium surroundings. "What is this?" Chloe asked, her voice hushed, her gaze darting between her meager belongings and the overwhelming grandeur of the room. "This is your permanent residence," Ray stated, stepping into the room and closing the heavy doors behind them, isolating them from the rest of the pack. "The guest suite was a temporary measure. You require adequate security, premium climate control, and immediate proximity to my quarters." "Ray," Chloe started, turning to face him, the multi-tool hanging loosely at her side. "This is the Luna's adjoining suite. The pack will instantly assume—" "Let them assume whatever they wish," Ray interrupted, his stormy eyes locking onto hers with unwavering, fierce intensity. "You are not a disposable asset, Chloe. You are the mechanic who sustains my infrastructure, the woman who thwarted a diplomatic assassination attempt, and the only individual who possesses the sheer audacity to wear my royal garments as a defiant fashion statement." He is looking at me like I am the most valuable artifact in this entire fortress, and my fiercely independent Delta brain is entirely short-circuiting. Chloe panicked internally, completely disarmed by his raw sincerity. Meatball let out a loud, rhythmic snore from the velvet chaise, entirely oblivious to the profound emotional shift occurring mere feet away. Ray walked slowly toward her, his gaze dropping briefly to the cold steel tool in her hand, then back up to her wide, expressive eyes. "Your belongings remain here, the dog remains here, and you remain under my direct, personal protection. Are these terms acceptable, Kingsley?" Chloe swallowed hard, the intoxicating fragrance of charred cedar enveloping her completely. She looked at the steady, hissing gas fireplace, the plush surroundings, and the imposing Alpha King standing before her. "They are acceptable," Chloe whispered, realizing with sudden, terrifying clarity that she no longer desired to return to the cold ever again. Chapter 13. Chloe stood frozen in the center of the Luna's adjoining suite, the heavy steel of her multi-tool gripping the warmth of her palm. The absolute luxury of the vaulted room clashed violently with her practical, mechanical instincts. Ray remained a few feet away, his towering frame perfectly still, watching her process the monumental shift in her reality. He is serious. He is actually placing a greasy, sarcastic mechanic in the most protected sector of the fortress. Chloe realized, a sudden, breathless tightness gripping her ribs. Ray took a slow, deliberate breath, drawing in the soothing fragrance of her bergamot and sun-warmed amber. He needed her to understand that this was not a fleeting whim. If I push too hard, her stubborn Delta pride will force her to run. I must anchor her here, with logic, not just alpha dominance. Ray calculated, adjusting the cuffs of his dark formal suit jacket. "The security protocols on this floor." Ray began, but the sentence was abruptly severed. Above them, the elegant crystal chandeliers flickered wildly. A low, agonizing groan echoed through the thick walls of the fortress, followed instantly by a terrifying, absolute blackout. The only source of illumination left in the massive suite was the brightly hissing gas fireplace, which operated on an independent, pressurized fuel line. It cast long, dancing shadows across the hand-woven rugs. Chloe did not panic. Instead, a distinct, sharp vibration traveled down her spine. The Delta Bond was a unique, psychological tether to the pack's infrastructure. She didn't just see the lights go out. She felt the profound, sudden silence of the primary turbine engines dying miles below them. That was not a localized breaker trip, Chloe stated, her voice stripping away all vulnerability, replaced instantly by clinical, technical authority. The main subterranean power grid just suffered a catastrophic, manual disconnect. Ray's alpha instinct surged, his piercing eyes scanning the darkened corners of the suite. Leander's guards. They must have bypassed the outer perimeter while we were trapped in the lift. If the main grid is severed, the perimeter defense shields will drop in exactly 10 minutes when the capacitor batteries drain. Chloe warned, marching swiftly toward her transparent plastic storage crate resting on the rug. I have to get to the sub-basement generators. You are not traversing this fortress in the dark alone, Ray commanded, his voice a dangerous rumble. I'm going with you. Chloe did not argue. She popped the lid off the plastic crate. Then turn around, Your Majesty, because I absolutely cannot sprint down 7 flights of maintenance stairs in a silk gown and heels. Ray's jaw tightened. He turned his broad back to her, staring fixedly into the steady flames of the gas fireplace. The heavy rustle of the rich plum silk sliding to the floor filled the quiet room, sending a spike of intense heat straight through his veins. Focus on the tactical threat. Do not think about the fact that she is currently dressing inches away from my spine. Ray ordered himself, his hands curling into tight fists. Chloe stepped out of the discarded luxury, swiftly pulling on her sanitized, durable canvas uniform trousers and a fitted black undershirt from the crate. She laced up her heavy leather steel-toed boots with practiced efficiency. Reaching deeper into the plastic bin, she retrieved a heavy-duty, military-grade tactical flashlight, clicking it once to test the blinding beam. Done, she announced, clipping her multi-tool back onto her utility belt. Ray turned around. She looked entirely in her element, capable, fierce, and ready for a war zone. He glanced briefly at Meatball, who was still snoring aggressively on the velvet-tufted chaise, entirely unbothered by the darkness. Leave the dog, Ray instructed, moving toward the heavy mahogany double doors. Stay directly behind me, Kingsley. We are hunting a saboteur. Chapter 14. The descent into the sub-basement was a tense, agonizingly quiet journey. The massive concrete stairwell echoed with the heavy thud of Chloe's steel-toed boots and the silent, lethal grace of Ray's strides. The temperature dropped significantly the deeper they traveled, replacing the filtered luxury of the upper floors with the raw, metallic chill of the industrial sector. Chloe kept her tactical flashlight pointed directly at the concrete steps, the bright white beam cutting through the suffocating darkness. Ray maintained his position just ahead of her, his broad shoulders serving as an impenetrable shield. His charred cedar scent blanketed the cold air, acting as a constant, reassuring anchor for her racing mind. He moves like a shadow. It is terrifyingly beautiful, and I am highly distracted by his tactical efficiency. Chloe admitted silently, cropping the flashlight tighter to steady her trembling fingers. They reached the heavy steel blast doors of the primary generator room. The digital lock was entirely dead. Ray wedged his long fingers into the microscopic seam between the thick metal plates. With a low, feral grunt, he relied entirely on raw alpha strength, forcing the massive doors apart with a harsh, grating screech. Chloe slipped through the gap, immediately sweeping the cavernous room with her light. The space was enormous, dominated by 3 colossal dormant turbine housings. A massive high-pressure steam valve protruded conspicuously from the adjacent boiler tank near the central control panel. Clear the perimeter, Ray murmured, his stormy eyes easily penetrating the gloom, utilizing his superior nocturnal vision. Chloe rushed toward the central control panel, sliding her multi-tool from her belt. She popped the primary access casing, her flashlight clamped securely between her teeth to free both hands. Ray stood a mere 3 feet away, continuously scanning the catwalks above them, yet his attention kept drifting back to the pale, focused mechanic working feverishly in the dark. She does not cower. She assesses, adapts, and executes. I have spent my reign surrounded by diplomats, entirely blind to the magnificent competence hiding in my own basement. Ray thought, a profound sense of respect fusing securely with his possessive instincts. Chloe pulled the flashlight from her mouth, exhaling a frustrated breath. They used a corrosive compound. The primary distribution cables are entirely melted. It will take days to splice new lines. The perimeter shields fall in 4 minutes, Ray noted, his tone grim. I know, Chloe replied, her expressive eyes darting around the machinery. But these old turbines have a manual, hydraulic failsafe. It is archaic and it requires a massive physical crank to engage the compression chamber, but it bypasses the melted cables. She jogged over to the side of the largest turbine, locating a heavy, rusted iron wheel bolted to the side of the casing. She grabbed it with both hands, planting her boots firmly against the concrete floor, and pulled with all her might. The wheel groaned in protest but refused to budge. Move, Ray ordered gently. He stepped up beside her, placing his massive hands directly over hers on the rusted iron. The sudden, scorching heat of his skin completely engulfed her freezing fingers. On 3, Ray instructed, his voice a low vibration against her ear. 1, 2, 3. Together, they wrenched the wheel downward. The rusted iron snapped free with a loud crack, rotating fully. Deep inside the massive machine, a low, rhythmic thumping began. The hydraulic starters engaged, coughing loudly before catching a steady, mechanical rhythm. We have auxiliary power, Chloe grinned, turning to face him, the victory bright in her eyes. But her smile vanished instantly as a silent, lethal shadow dropped directly from the catwalk above them, landing soundlessly right behind the Alpha King. Chapter 15. Ray, behind you! Chloe screamed, her voice tearing through the rhythmic thumping of the waking generators. Ray spun with terrifying primal speed, his human pupils swallowing the dark room as his eyes flashed to a brilliant luminescent gold. The assassin, clad entirely in matte black tactical gear, lunged forward. The attacker wielded a long, wicked combat knife. Even in the dim light, the blade possessed a distinct, dull sheen. It was heavily coated in pure silver. Silver. A single deep laceration could drop an alpha for hours. I cannot let that blade touch him. Chloe panicked, a sudden absence of air hitting her lungs as adrenaline flooded her system. Ray intercepted the attacker's arm, his massive hand clamping around the assassin's wrist. The force of the impact sent a shockwave through the air. The saboteur was not a mere foot soldier. He was a highly trained rogue wolf, matching Ray's initial strength with desperate, feral ferocity. They slammed against the steel casing of the primary turbine. Ray delivered a devastating knee to the assassin's ribs, producing a sickening crunch of bone, but the attacker twisted wildly, freeing the silver blade for a secondary strike. Chloe did not freeze. She assessed the battlefield instantly. She was standing merely 2 feet away from the massive high-pressure steam valve she had noted upon entering the room. She gripped her military-grade flashlight, aimed it directly at the assassin's face, and slammed the power button to maximum strobe. The blinding, rapid-fire burst of harsh white light disoriented the rogue instantly, causing him to flinch and miss his fatal strike toward Ray's throat. She is shielding me. The mechanic is actively engaging a trained killer to protect my life, Ray realized in a split second of awe, using the rogue's hesitation to land a punishing blow to the jaw. But the assassin blindly slashed outward as he stumbled. The silver-coated tip of the knife tore a deep, jagged gash across the bicep of Ray's tailored formal suit jacket, slicing deeply into the pale muscle beneath. Ray let out a ragged, furious roar. The silver immediately burned his flesh, the toxic metal severely inhibiting his accelerated healing. Chloe acted on pure instinct. She ripped her multi-tool from her belt, exposing the thick, flat-head pry bar. She lunged toward the boiler tank and jammed the steel wedge directly under the release lever of the high-pressure steam valve. With a violent upward thrust, she broke the safety seal. A deafening, pressurized screech erupted from the pipe. A massive cloud of scalding, blinding white steam blasted directly into the assassin's flank. The rogue screamed in agony, dropping the silver knife as the boiling vapor scorched his tactical gear. The distraction was absolute. Ray surged forward despite his bleeding arm, grabbing the assassin by the tactical vest and hurling him violently across the room. The attacker crashed heavily against the concrete wall and crumpled to the floor, entirely unconscious. The generator room fell silent, save for the hissing steam, and the steady, reviving hum of the pack's auxiliary power. The dim emergency lights flickered on, casting a sickly yellow glow over the carnage. Chloe scrambled forward, kicking the silver knife far away across the concrete floor. She reached Ray, her hands hovering nervously over his bleeding, ruined sleeve. "You are hurt. The silver is toxic," Ray gritted out, his chest heaving, his breathing suddenly labored. The golden glow in his eyes was flickering erratically, a clear sign the heavy metal was poisoning his bloodstream. He leaned heavily against the turbine, his dominant aura fracturing under the intense pain. "I need to get out of this sector, now." Chapter 16. The trek back to the Alpha residential tier was agonizingly slow. The pack's auxiliary lighting provided a dim, continuous path, but Ray was deteriorating rapidly. Silver wounds did not close in minutes. They festered, dragging a werewolf's accelerated biology down to a frail, vulnerable human pace. Chloe supported a significant portion of his massive weight, her shoulder wedged firmly under his uninjured arm. His breathing was harsh and ragged, the heat radiating from his skin elevating from his usual comforting warmth to a terrifying, scorching fever. Ray paused at a wall-mounted emergency comms unit in the stairwell. He punched the secure button with a trembling, blood-stained finger. "Intruder subdued in primary generator sector." He rasped into the microphone. "Secure the prisoner. Nobody accesses the royal tier tonight." "Nobody. I cannot let the council or the guards see me incapacitated. It projects profound weakness. Only she can witness this vulnerability." Ray reasoned fiercely, the silver toxicity stripping away his rational diplomacy and leaving only raw protective instincts. They finally reached the heavy mahogany doors of the Luna's adjoining suite. Ray bypassed the lock, stumbling inside. The room was exactly as they had left it. The gas fireplace continued its steady, hissing burn, casting warm light over the plush rugs. On the velvet-tufted chaise, Meatball snorted loudly, shifting his bulky weight without opening his eyes. Chloe guided the towering Alpha toward the edge of the massive, luxurious bed. He collapsed heavily onto the mattress, his head hanging between his knees. "I need to call the pack medical staff," Chloe stated urgently, pulling her tactical flashlight from her belt and setting it on the bedside table. "You need the wound flushed. The silver residue is causing a massive systemic reaction." She turned toward the door, but Ray's uninjured hand shot out with terrifying speed. He gripped her wrist, not with his usual gentle guidance, but with a desperate, feverish possessiveness. "No medics," Ray growled, his voice a gravelly, overlapping cadence. He pulled her firmly back toward the bed, the sheer force dragging her until her knees bumped against the mattress between his parted legs. "His core temperature is dangerously elevated, and his alpha logic is completely compromised. He is operating purely on base, territorial instinct." Chloe recognized, her pulse thudding a heavy, relentless tempo against her throat. "Ray, you are bleeding profusely," Chloe argued softly, refusing to pull away from his scorching grip. "Your jacket is ruined, and I need to see the laceration." Ray finally released her wrist, only to reach up with both trembling hands to grip her waist. He rested his fevered forehead directly against her stomach, burying his face into the durable canvas of her uniform shirt. He drew in a massive, ragged breath, inhaling the bergamot and sun-warmed amber fragrance that anchored his fractured mind. "You stay," Ray ordered, his words slightly slurred from the mounting fever. "Nobody else touches me. You protected the den. You tend the wound." Chloe stared down at his midnight-colored hair, completely disarmed by the profound, primal submission of the Alpha King, laying his vulnerable life entirely in her hands. She carefully reached down, her rust-stained fingers lightly grazing his broad, tense shoulders. "Okay," Chloe whispered, her voice remarkably steady despite the chaotic storm of emotions swirling in her chest. "I am right here, Ray. I will fix it." She gently grasped the lapels of his ruined, blood-soaked formal jacket, preparing to face the extensive damage the rival pack had inflicted upon the man she was rapidly realizing she could no longer walk away from. Chapter 17. The soft, muted light of dawn crept through the panoramic windows of the Luna's adjoining suite, casting long, pale streaks across the hand-woven rug. Ray Stormbringer opened his eyes, staring at the vaulted ceiling. The terrifying, scorching fever that had compromised his rational mind was gone. replaced by a dull, throbbing ache radiating from his left bicep. He shifted his weight on the massive mattress, wincing slightly as the injured muscle protested. Glancing downward, he noted his ruined, blood-soaked formal jacket and shredded dress shirt had been entirely discarded on the floor near his polished formal shoes. He was still wearing his dark trousers, and his injured arm was expertly wrapped in a makeshift bandage fashioned from a torn segment of a sterile white towel. My accelerated healing is finally conquering the silver toxicity, but the sheer vulnerability of my current state is deeply unsettling. Ray analyzed, running a hand through his rumpled, midnight-colored hair. He turned his head. Chloe Kingsley was slumped awkwardly in the plush velvet armchair near the quietly hissing gas fireplace, her heavy leather steel-toed boots resting haphazardly against the hearth. She still wore her durable canvas uniform trousers and the fitted black undershirt. A smudge of dried blood, his blood, stained her collarbone. On the velvet-tufted chaise nearby, Meatball snored with thunderous, rhythmic volume. The sudden influx of memories hit Ray with staggering force. The saboteur, the scalding steam, the fact that a grease-stained mechanic had fearlessly positioned herself between a trained assassin and her alpha cane. She risked her life for a ruler who ripped her clothing and mockingly demanded her servitude. I have dragged her directly into a lethal crossfire, Ray realized, a cold, heavy dread settling firmly in his chest. The rustle of the mattress woke Chloe. Her wide, expressive eyes snapped open, immediately darting toward the bed to assess his condition. Seeing him awake and alert, she released a long, shaky breath, her posture sagging with relief. "You survived the night," Chloe stated, her voice raspy from exhaustion. She pushed herself out of the armchair, quickly stepping back into her heavy boots, her multi-tool clinking softly against her utility belt. "Your core temperature stabilized around 3 in the morning." Ray sat up fully, ignoring the sharp twinge in his arm. He needed to establish distance, immediately, before his possessive instincts overshadowed his tactical judgment. "You should not be here," Ray commanded, his tone deliberately cold and detached. "The royal tier is no longer secure. You will gather your plastic crate and return to the lower levels today." Chloe stopped halfway to the bed, her brow furrowing in profound confusion. "My barracks are currently drying out from a massive plumbing disaster, Ray. You explicitly locked me in this suite and declared it my permanent residence." "The parameters have shifted," Ray countered harshly, swinging his long, trouser-clad legs over the edge of the mattress. "The Silverfall summit failed. My perimeter was breached. A Delta mechanic cannot remain in the primary blast radius of an escalating territorial conflict. This man is a walking, infuriating paradox. He claims me with feverish intensity, then attempts to discard me the moment his protective guilt surfaces." Chloe fumed internally, her pulse accelerating with a sudden, fiery indignation. "I am assigning you a security detail," Ray continued, standing up to his full, towering height despite his injury. "They will escort you to a secure bunker in the southern sector. You will remain there until I dismantle Leander's network." She tilted her chin upward, meeting his intense glare without a fraction of hesitation. "You need your primary power grid spliced, and I am the only technician who understands how to bypass the melted distribution cables. You are not locking me in a bunker." "No," Chloe replied, her voice remarkably even, crossing her arms over her chest. "I am not going anywhere." Chapter 18. The steady, pressurized hiss of the gas fireplace seemed to amplify in the tense, suffocating silence of the suite. Ray stared down at the copper-haired woman, astounded by her blatant refusal. An Alpha King's directive was law, an irrefutable mandate, yet Chloe Kingsley treated his commands like minor, annoying suggestions. "This is not a negotiation, Kingsley," Ray growled, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. His broad, bare chest heaved slightly, the pale skin taut over heavily muscled contours. "An assassin infiltrated my sub-basement. My own council might harbor a traitor. You are a civilian target. If Leander's operatives realize she is my singular weakness, they will utilize her to orchestrate my complete destruction. I cannot allow her to become collateral damage." Ray deduced grimly, suppressing the urge to simply carry her to the southern bunker himself. Chloe held her ground, her steel-toed boots planted firmly on the intricate rug. I stopped being a civilian the moment you forced me to attend a diplomatic summit with a concealed weapon strapped to my thigh. I blinded that rogue with my tactical flashlight. I extracted the toxic silver flakes from your torn muscle using the precision tweezers from my multi-tool and a sterile towel. Meatball, roused by the escalating volume, rolled off the velvet-tufted chaise. The English bulldog waddled directly across the room, bypassed Chloe entirely, and sat heavily upon Ray's left foot, letting out a prolonged, demanding snort. Even her lethargic animal refuses to acknowledge my authority. My entire hierarchy is crumbling beneath the stubbornness of this Delta duo. Ray mused, staring down at the wrinkly canine currently drooling on his bare toes. I am not a fragile ornament, Chloe continued, her voice rising with fierce, unapologetic passion. She pointed a grease-stained finger directly at his chest. Deltas run the intricate engine of this pack. We repair the severed lines, we maintain the perimeter shields, and we clean up the messes the Alpha Tier creates. If you want to survive this internal sabotage, you need someone who understands how this fortress operates from the inside out. Ray's jaw tightened. The sheer magnitude of her courage was staggering. She wasn't demanding protection. She was demanding participation. I am your equal in this fight, Ray, Chloe whispered, dropping her hand to rest on the heavy steel of her multi-tool. Do not push me into a dark room while you bleed for my home. She looks at me not as a terrifying ruler, but as a man who requires a competent partner. It is the most profoundly intoxicating realization of my existence. Ray admitted silently, the icy wall of his protective detachment shattering completely. He reached out, his uninjured hand gently grasping her chin, his thumb brushing over the dried smudge of blood on her collarbone. The intoxicating aroma of bergamot and sun-warmed amber washed over him, anchoring his fractured instincts. The saboteur we subdued, Ray stated, his voice dropping to a gravelly conspiratorial timbre. He bypassed the exterior biometric scanners. That requires a synchronized internal override code. Chloe leaned slightly into his touch, her racing pulse steadying under his sudden shift in demeanor. Only the senior council members possess that specific encryption key. Precisely, Ray agreed, his eyes darkening with lethal intent. My beta, Harlan, manages the sub-basement security protocols. He is the only individual capable of masking the rogue's thermal signature from the automated defense grid. Chloe chewed her bottom lip, her mind racing through the technical logistics. If Harlan provided the override, the mainframe will log the localized keystrokes. I can extract the corrupted data file. Ray stepped back, carefully dislodging Meatball from his foot. He walked toward his massive wardrobe, pulling out a fresh dark linen shirt, quickly pulling on a pair of heavy combat boots, and retrieving a sleek, silver data drive from a secure drawer. He tossed the physical drive to her.
Use the secure terminal in my suite to extract the data, Kingsley, because today we are executing a traitor.
Chapter 19. The grand courtyard of the Stormbringer Fortress was an imposing expanse of gray stone, surrounded by towering battlements. The morning air was crisp and biting, carrying the faint scent of impending violence. Hundreds of pack members had gathered, forming a wide, silent circle around the perimeter. Chloe stood near the heavy iron gates, watching as Ray held the silver data drive she had just extracted from his secure terminal. Her stomach twisted into tight, agonizing knots. Ray stood in the center of the arena, his dark linen shirt unbuttoned at the collar, hiding the thick bandages wrapping his healing bicep. Directly opposite him stood Harlan. The high-ranking beta was a massive, heavily scarred man whose ambition had clearly eclipsed his loyalty. Ray did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The suffocating, dominant weight of his charred cedar scent rolled across the stone arena, forcing several lower-ranking wolves to drop their gaze as he held up the silver data drive.
You disabled the perimeter defense shields,
Ray stated, his tone devoid of all emotion. You provided a Silverfall assassin with the thermal bypass code. You jeopardized the core infrastructure of this territory. The data is irrefutable. You present forged digital records compiled by a grease-stained mechanic to accuse me of treason? Harlan sneered, his voice echoing loudly across the silent courtyard. He paced like a caged predator, attempting to rally the murmuring crowd. You elevate a Delta to the royal suite, disregard the summit diplomacy, and now you fabricate lies to eliminate your own council. You are a compromised king, Carlin is deliberately aiming for maximum theatrical humiliation to justify a lethal challenge. He knows the king is injured, making this the optimal moment for a coup. Chloe observed grimly, her fingers gripping the cold steel of her multi-tool. Harlan stopped pacing. The sneer vanished, replaced by a dark, feral snarl.
Leander promised us advantageous trade routes. You were too stubborn to negotiate, Ray. I did what was necessary for the prosperity of this pack. You orchestrated an assassination, Ray corrected quietly. And now, you will answer for it. Harlan didn't wait for a formal declaration. With the sickening crunch of rapidly realigning bone and tearing fabric, the beta shifted. A colossal dark brown wolf erupted into the courtyard, its jaws snapping violently as it launched itself directly at the Alpha King. Ray moved with blistering primal speed. He did not transition into his full wolf form. His silver-laced wound severely hindered the complex biological shift, but he channeled his partial alpha strength flawlessly. He sidestepped the massive beast's initial lunge, his luminescent golden eyes tracking the beta's erratic movements. His left arm is significantly slower. If Harlan manages to secure his jaws around that injured bicep, the fight will conclude in a devastating catastrophe. Chloe panicked, her breath catching painfully in her throat. The brown wolf spun, its heavy paws sliding on the stone, and lunged again. Harlan aimed specifically for Ray's weakened left side. Ray anticipated the cowardly tactic. Instead of retreating, he stepped aggressively into the attack. He used his uninjured right arm to deliver a devastating, crushing blow directly to the wolf's snout. The impact resonated with a sharp crack. Harlan yelped, his momentum faltering. Before the beta could recover, Ray seized the thick fur at the scruff of the wolf's neck. Utilizing his towering frame and superior leverage, Ray violently slammed the massive beast into the unforgiving gray stone of the courtyard. The ground shuddered. Harlan thrashed weakly, but Ray pinned the wolf's throat beneath his heavy leather boot, applying lethal, calculated pressure. The fight was over in less than 60 seconds. Treason, Ray announced, his voice a vibrating demonic harmony that commanded complete silence from the observing crowd. Is punished by permanent exile. Strip his rank and remove him from my territory. Chapter 20. The heavy iron gates of the fortress slammed shut, echoing with a resounding metallic finality as Harlan was dragged into permanent exile. The vast courtyard remained utterly silent. The pack stood motionless, processing the blistering speed and brutal efficiency with which their Alpha King had dismantled a high-ranking coup. Ray stepped away from the center of the arena. His chest heaved rhythmically beneath his dark linen shirt, the luminescent gold slowly receding from his irises to reveal his familiar stormy gaze. He ignored the murmuring council members and the stoic guards. His attention was entirely fixated on the copper-haired woman standing near the perimeter. Chloe released a long, shuddering breath, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline finally began to recede from her veins. He defeated a massive shifted beta utilizing only a fraction of his physical capacity. The sheer, unadulterated power he wields is profoundly intimidating, Chloe admitted silently, watching him stride purposefully toward her. Ray stopped mere inches from her, the intense heat of his skin radiating outward, wrapping her in his dominant, comforting scent. The perimeter is secure, he murmured, his voice meant only for her. Your data drive was the primary catalyst, Chloe replied, attempting a wry smile to mask her lingering anxiety. I merely provided the technical extraction. Ray turned to face the hundreds of pack members watching them. He reached out, his long fingers gently but firmly wrapping around Chloe's waist, pulling her flush against his side. The crowd gasped collectively at the blatant intimate display, a Delta, clad in a blood-stained undershirt and canvas trousers, being held by the Alpha King. The archaic hierarchy of this pack is fundamentally broken. Ray's voice boomed across the stone courtyard, carrying irrefutable authority. For years, we have neglected the foundational tiers that sustain our infrastructure. We valued political ambition over practical survival. That negligence ends today. He is orchestrating a monumental societal shift in front of the entire territory. And I am standing here clutching a multi-tool like a complete anomaly. Chloe realized, her pulse skyrocketing as the sheer magnitude of the moment settled over her. Ray looked down at her, his expression softening into something raw and incredibly vulnerable. She descended into the dark. She repaired the severed core. She stood between a silver blade and my life, demanding nothing but the preservation of her home. He shifted his gaze back to the stunned crowd. Chloe Kingsley is not a disposable asset. She is my equal. She is the Luna of the Stormbringer pack. A profound, stunned silence hung over the courtyard for 3 agonizing seconds. Then a senior maintenance technician in the back row dropped to one knee, bowing his head. A guard followed.
Within moments, the entire pack had submitted, acknowledging their new queen. Chloe looked up at Ray, a brilliant, genuine smile finally breaking across her face. You realize I'm still going to overhaul the lower-level plumbing systems, correct? Ray chuckled, a rich, vibrating sound that completely erased the lingering tension. I expect nothing less, my Luna. 2 weeks later, the Luna's adjoining suite was bathed in warm afternoon sunlight. The gas fireplace burned with a steady, comforting hiss. Chloe sat on the edge of the massive bed, reviewing a stack of upgraded infrastructural blueprints. Ray emerged from his connecting master suite, dressed in tailored trousers and a casual button-down. He carried a small, velvet-lined box. He walked over to the velvet-tufted chaise, where Meatball was loudly snoring. With a surprisingly gentle touch, Ray fastened a ridiculously thick, custom-crafted golden collar around the bulldog's wrinkly neck. The metal gleamed brilliantly in the sunlight. Meatball opened one drooping eye, sniffed the expensive jewelry, snorted dismissively, and promptly went back to sleep. He possesses entirely zero appreciation for royal craftsmanship, Ray sighed, sitting beside Chloe on the bed and pulling her close. He is a Delta dog, Chloe laughed, resting her head against his broad shoulder. We prefer practical hardware. Ray kissed the crown of her head, inhaling the sweet scent of bergamot. Fortunately, I am learning to appreciate practical hardware as well. The end. Quick favor, don't go anywhere yet. If you thought Chloe was brave for wearing the king's shirt as a dress and then arguing while half naked, wait until you meet the heroine in this next story on your screen. You have to hear this disaster unfold. Click the video on your screen right now. It is absolutely unhinged.